Subscribe for more mysteries, unsolved and unexplained.
Hey everyone, let's dive right into this explainer covering one of the absolute most chilling maritime mysteries of the 20th century. We're talking about the ghost ship of the Pacific. Today, we're unpacking the baffling case of the MV Joyita. Picture this, a vessel found completely abandoned out in the open ocean, with literally zero trace of the people who set sail on her. 25. Just sit with that number for a second. In October 1955, 25 passengers and crew vanished into thin air, somewhere in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the South Pacific. Gone, never to be seen again. And here's the wild part. As of 2012, all 25 of them are still officially declared as missing. To even begin to understand how a tragedy like this happens, we kind of need to look at exactly how their ship was found. Jump forward 5 weeks after the Joyita initially set sail. On November 10th, the captain of a merchant ship called the Tuvalu, a guy named Gerald Douglas, makes this incredibly eerie discovery. He stumbles upon the Joyita partially submerged, leaning really heavily to one side, with its port deck rail just awash with water. But honestly, here's the crazy part. The ship was drifting north of Vanuatu. That is more than 600 miles off its scheduled route. The ship was there, 4 tons of cargo were completely missing, and the people just gone. Which brings us to the absolute core of this explainer, the agonizing question at the center of this entire mystery. Why on earth would 25 people abandon a ship that fundamentally, physically could not sink? To figure that out, we're going to unpack the original evidence dossier to see what actually went down aboard the Joyita.
All right, let's rewind a bit. On the morning of October 3rd, 1955, the Joyita left Apia Harbor in Samoa, heading for the Tokelau Islands. It was supposed to be a standard 270-mile route, right? Just a routine trip expected to take maybe 41 to 48 hours. On board, you had 16 crew members and 9 passengers. That included a prominent World War II surgeon who was actually on his way to perform an amputation, plus 2 kids, medical supplies, some timber, and 80 empty 45-gallon oil drums. Now, the biggest contradiction of this whole puzzle lies in the ship's hull. Back in 1948, the Joyita was outfitted to carry refrigerated cargo. What that means is they installed 640 cubic feet of cork lining right inside the holds. That is a massive amount of cork. Because of that thick lining, plus those 80 empty fuel drums I just mentioned in the cargo, the Joyita was, for all intents and purposes, completely unsinkable.
To really put this into perspective, think about a standard wooden ship of this size. If it suffered the kind of flooding the Joyita experienced, it would have been pulled straight down to the ocean floor like a stone. But the Joyita's hull was totally sound. In fact, when investigators eventually towed her into harbor at Suva and just pumped the water out, she stubbornly popped right back up and floated on a stable, even keel. No problem. Literally, even when entirely swamped with water, falling beam on to these heavy, punishing swells, and rolling way over to her port side, the sheer math of her buoyancy guaranteed she was going to stay at the surface. And here's the thing, Captain Miller, the guy in charge, he knew this ship inside and out. He would have known without a doubt that abandoning ship was a death sentence. So what in the world forced them off?
Well, the recovery party quickly realized this wasn't just a simple sinking. They found a string of clues that feel like they're straight off a detective's evidence board. First off, the electric clocks, which were wired to the generator, had all stopped dead at exactly 10:25. The cabin lighting switches are on, which tells us whatever nightmare unfolded, it happened at night. Crucial navigational gear, the logbook, the sextant, the chronometer, all completely gone. Captain Miller's personal firearms were missing too. The flying bridge was totally smashed up, and someone had rigged up a makeshift canvas on it. But maybe the most chilling detail? A doctor's bag was sitting on deck, and inside were 4 lengths of blood-stained bandages. Oh, and the dinghy and all 3 of the ship's life rafts were missing. The whole shebang, just gone. And to make matters even worse, try to imagine the sheer terror and isolation these people must have felt. The search team found the ship's radio tuned to 2182 kHz, which is the International Marine Distress Channel. But there was a fatal mistake. There was a break in the cable between the radio set and the aerial. And someone, somehow, had carelessly painted over the cable, completely hiding the break. That one tiny mistake limited their radio range to just 2 miles. 2 miles! They were essentially screaming for help into a void across the massive Pacific Ocean, and there was literally no one who could hear them.
Okay, so how did the ship even flood in the first place? Let's walk through the exact anatomy of the mechanical disaster that doomed them. Because of a clutch failure that delayed their departure, they actually left port limping along on just one working engine. Once they were out at sea, a raw water cooling pipe for the broken port engine fractured. This was due to galvanic corrosion. So water slowly starts filling the bilges, but it's totally hidden beneath the engine room floorboards. By the time they noticed the water rising above those boards, it was way too late. The bilge pumps didn't have strainers fitted, so a bunch of debris clogged them up instantly, making it impossible to pump the water out. Ultimately, that rising water killed their one good engine and knocked out all the electrical power. They were completely dead in the water in the pitch black. Fast forward to February 1956. A formal maritime inquiry is held in Apia. They map out all these mechanical failures we just talked about, and they definitely put a lot of blame on Captain Miller for being reckless. I mean, he set out on an ocean voyage with one engine, a bunch of minor faults, and an expired license. But when it came down to explaining the actual fate of the 25 souls on board, the official inquiry literally just threw their hands up. They declared it inexplicable on the evidence submitted. They just could not rationalize why anyone would voluntarily abandon a cork-lined, unsinkable ship. Section 3. Analyzing the hypotheses, from mutiny to Cold War paranoia. Let's move into the leading theories to see how this builds into an examination of post-war anxiety, extreme human desperation, and what really might have happened in the dark. You have to remember the context of the time. Geopolitical paranoia was sky high. You had sensational newspaper headlines, like from the Fiji Times, literally claiming that passengers and crew were killed by Japanese forces. Following World War II, there was a ton of anti-Japanese sentiment lingering in the Pacific. So media outlets aggressively pushed these wild claims that the Joyita had stumbled upon something secret involving a Japanese fishing fleet, or even that a Soviet submarine had kidnapped the crew, thanks to those rising Cold War tensions.
But when investigators actually looked at the facts, they objectively dismantled these sensational rumors pretty quickly. For example, the whole secret Japanese forces claim? That was fueled by some knives found on board stamped "Made in Japan." But the reality? Forensic tests proved they were literally just old, broken fishing knives left over from the late 40s when the ship was used for fishing. And what about the theory that the ship was rammed by foreign vessels or pirates? Well, investigators saw some light damage to the superstructure, but it wasn't from a collision at all. It was entirely consistent with heavy waves just pounding the lightly built deckhouse while the ship drifted empty.
A much more grounded theory is what's called the injured captain hypothesis. Look, Captain Miller knew that ship was unsinkable. His good friend, Captain S.B. Brown, insisted Miller would never have left the Joyita alive. So this theory suggests that a violent struggle or a severe accident completely incapacitated him. Think back to that doctor's bag on the deck with the blood-stained bandages. If their highly experienced captain was bleeding out and couldn't command the ship, the remaining crew and passengers, who were mostly inexperienced, probably just gave in to blind, absolute panic as that dark, freezing water relentlessly kept rising in the engine room.
Then you have British author Robin Maugham. He actually bought the Joyita years later, spent years investigating, and put together this super compelling mutiny timeline. Based on his research, Captain Miller was in massive debt and desperately needed to reach his destination. Around 9 p.m. on the second night, that cooling pipe fails. By 10:25 p.m., the rising water drowns the starboard engine and stops all the clocks. As squally, rough weather sets in, the first mate, Chuck Simpson, demands they turn back. Miller refuses. Maugham believes a violent mutiny broke out right then and there. Miller gets seriously injured, Simpson takes over, and then Simpson makes the fatal call to abandon the flooded, but still floating, ship. They load the injured Miller, the navigational gear, and the guns into these tiny rafts and take off into the night.
And that leads us to the ultimate, truly heartbreaking tragedy of this whole story. Whether they were driven off by a bloody mutiny or just pure overwhelming panic, the crew made a massive, fatal miscalculation. They abandoned a heavy, cork-lined vessel that was guaranteed to float and traded it for tiny, completely unprotected rafts in the middle of 40-mile-per-hour winds. And the absolute worst part? The Joyita did not even carry enough life jackets for everyone on board. Tossed into those heavy swells, those small rafts would have been quickly dragged out to the open sea, sealing the fate of every single person.
The Joyita itself actually survived, just floating aimlessly until someone stumbled upon it weeks later. But those 25 souls, swallowed by the vast Pacific. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. When you look at the evidence, the blood-stained bandages, the clock stopped precisely at 10:25, and a literally unsinkable ship found completely empty, did they succumb to sheer panic, some unlikely act of piracy, or a desperate mutiny in the pitch black? It is a fascinating, terrifying mystery that to this day remains perfectly unsolved.